Greetings, traveler. Have you ever been in a situation where you want to make a presentation that's long and interesting and full of interesting text and colorful props and so on to make it engaging and to make it not look like a typical business-like presentation? I have certainly been in that situation myself plenty of times, and ever since I was in school, knowing that I have to do a presentation on anything was just a complete nightmare. And this nightmare continued for several years later on in my life until I found a way of writing out presentations in a way that basically was extremely natural to me. What was the result of all that? I managed to make presentations like this one that run for, let's see, 170 something slides easily without basically putting any effort or any thought into it, just thinking about the topic and writing out the most natural, most related information to that topic. So what I want to do today is talk about how this style of presentation plays out when you use it for the first time, why it's so useful and why it's so natural to write, and how you start out in such a way that it makes expanding the presentation and adding as many slides as you want basically effortless. So the way I wrote out that previous presentation that went into the hundreds of pages, not that a presentation needs to be that long, but that particular one was aimed to be pretty extensive. So if I wanted to write it again, or if I wanted to make it shorter or even longer, this is what I would do. So I already knew the topic we would be covering, so some way to make storytelling easy from my experience. And I've spoken about on this channel before for the 6 questions that make writing basically any story very, very easy without having to draw a blank in your mind and without having to create information out of nowhere. Basically, you ask yourself these 6 questions, you simply answer them, and you have the backbone to your story. So I wanted to introduce this concept to an audience of game creators and game industry people. And I knew I would have to somehow frame it. And I didn't want to go into too much detail about exactly what we're talking about and all the details. I wanted to keep it pretty high level in the beginning. So without even jumping into a presentation document, I would just open a text editor like Word or Notes or anything really, anything where you can write text in, and just write as little as possible, starting with just the bare minimum. And I thought, well, what's the bare minimum for this presentation? The goal is to show an easy way that I have of writing stories. But in order to frame it, first I thought, okay, probably we have to highlight the problem, talk about why we're doing this presentation to begin with. Then we would have to talk about the 6 questions, what they are. And finally, I thought it would be good to test the answers to the questions we have with Aristotle's Poetics. So I would have to introduce that too. Now, keep in mind, this was a pretty extensive presentation, so there's a lot of meaty stuff to go over here. But you can see how these 3 items, the first one is usually going to be some introduction of some sort of the problem. So this is pretty common between many presentations. So it's really a question of the other 2. And I like to work in 3s. You don't have to work in 3s. I could just make it about these 2 topics and go into detail for more. Obviously, the questions are 6, so we don't have to do only 3 questions. And obviously, Aristotle's Poetics, the way I've covered them before, it's around 4 key concepts. So again, there's no need to use the rule of 3 all the time. But using this rule of 3, so starting with 3 items that explain your main topic and then breaking them down into 3 sub-items and so on, just makes it very easy. So let's jump in and let's do it together so you can see how this type of presentation plays out. So, highlighting the problem. Here, I would typically cover 3 things, right? So, why is this a problem? So why don't people normally write infinitely big stories? Another is what usually happens. So what people try to write big stories, or they try to make them very realistic, but they don't have any structure around what the story should be about, what should the point of the story be, and so on, and they just try to rush into it. What are the typical telltale signs that we could be doing this better? Again, this is all according to my experience. So, and finally, what is the issue with it? So these are things that simply come from my memory and from my experience, since this is the topic I chose to talk about. If this was a topic I didn't know about and I would have to do some research first, let's say I had to read 2 books before I do a presentation on some topic, then simply reading the books beforehand puts that information in your mind. So even if the topic you want to present is not in your mind when you do the presentation, you can put it in your mind by doing the research first. And the research is usually just Googling and reading, so it's not very challenging to do. So we have the information in our mind one way or another, and then we just follow the most natural steps. So usually 3 points to explain one core concept is a good start, and you can increase or decrease them as you see fit. Now, introducing the questions here, I've spoken about the 6 questions before, so briefly, where, when, who, why, what, and again, what happened in the end. So anyway, I'm not going to go into the details of that here, and actually there was one more, the bonus one, but here I just know that these are the questions that I talked about in the beginning. So here what I'm doing is I'm just writing them out in the minimum, like smallest, shortest form possible. I'm not trying to write the whole presentation in this one document. I'm just trying to talk about all the things I want to cover, but as briefly as possible. So I don't want to leave this screen while I'm creating this backbone for the presentation. And finally, in this presentation, I wanted to talk about Aristotle's Poetics. So the way I structured it was about, let's see, tension, novelty, relevance, and pace. Oh, not pace, language. So again, I have a different video where I go over these concepts on the channel, and this is really not important for this presentation, or for this video, but basically these are the 4 aspects I could talk about around Aristotle's Poetics. And basically we're done with the backbone. This is it. So this large 100-something page long presentation starts with this, and it's only these topics that we're going to cover. So what do we do here as a next step? The only thing we need to do now is to take each one of these sections. So roughly this would be section 1, we talk about the problem. Section 2, we say that in order to solve the issues we encountered in the previous section, we are going to address these 6 questions. And in the end, we might want to add an example as well. Again, this is completely optional. I just thought about it right now, and that's the beauty of this method. Anything that comes to your mind, you can just add it and see how it turns out in the presentation. You can still add and remove things whenever you want. But saying we'll just start with 3 just already gave us this large volume of content to start with. And for the last section, for our, testing our answers with Aristotle's Poetics, the point is that we take the output of these questions, and then we make sure that for our story, the story has the right tension, so it doesn't move too slow or too fast based on what we're going for. It has novelty, so it introduces something new to the listener. It has relevance, so it's relevant to the listener's life in some way. It shares some experiences or some places or some situations somehow. And finally, it has the right language. So if we're making a children's book story, then it uses very simple language. If we're making a super complicated sci-fi story, then it uses sci-fi terms and esoteric language. So we just make sure that our choice of words fits the topic. Now, you might be thinking, okay, we have this, but these few lines don't make a 100-page long presentation. Well, this is what the next step is here, really. So what I would do next is start a new presentation, and I'm not going to do it here to save you time, but I will talk about everything I will do. So keeping this document open, I would simply open a new presentation and copy and paste each one of them in one slide. So each slide gets one of these lines. And here the first three are nicely separated. So one slide for highlight the problem, one for why is this a problem, what usually happens, what is the issue with it. So that's for the first 4 slides. We only paste this into the document. And then for the next section, introduce the questions is one slide, and then one slide each for each one of these questions. Probably some intro here about why we're going with this framework to begin with. Might be in order, but again, I can choose to remove it later on. Finally, with Aristotle's Poetics, one slide for this to denote that we're moving to the third section of the presentation, and then do one slide each for each one of these 4 concepts. And basically, that gives us the basis of our presentation. And if you're worried about making presentations that are long enough, if you're stressed about making something that looks meaty and interesting enough, like I was earlier in my life, let's see what we have here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 slides. So this should output 18 slides, maybe 20 if we choose to do another intro and example. Down here, 21 if we choose to do a wrap it all together, a summary slide. So 21 pages is a good start for the absolutely first zero complexity, as short as possible version of the presentation. So without really writing anything about the presentation itself, we start with a good 20 pages. And again, you can adjust this as you like. You can start with 10 and you can start with 50, whatever suits your audience and the time you have available to present. So what would we do with each one of these slides that we created here? So each one of these slides will have this text in it, and our intention here is to use each one of these lines as the title of the slide. So when we say highlight the problem, our audience knows nothing about this presentation. They know the title, which we put in its own slide, and all people have to move forward is that we're going to give them some sort of magic trick to make their storytelling easier. That's all they know. They don't know if this is for games or for comic books or for theater. They don't know at this point. So perhaps that's the first thing to address here. So if we're talking about something specific, then we start talking about that. If we talk about games only, then in this slide we'll say this presentation is about games, for example, or this presentation is about storytelling in general. And those thoughts, exactly those thoughts that you get when you see this title of a slide, are the slide. So the moment I see this highlight the problem, I think, well, how do we highlight the problem? What is the problem to begin with? The problem is that we see many stories out there and on TV and in games and elsewhere, and we think, man, this story is too simple. It could be a little bit more complicated. Or, man, this story is good, but the pacing is too slow. So the words I said just now, so we see out there that many stories, fail to satisfy us in some way. That is the first line of the first slide here for highlighting the problem. And then the two examples that I mentioned. So the story is too simple, or the second example that the story is complex enough, but it has a pace that doesn't match it. These are the two examples I would talk about in this page. So let's go a bit further down and let's do the content of the first slide just to show you how this will go. So assuming this is the first slide of the presentation, it would have the title, and then we would go in and say most games today have a rather simple story. Now, this is not bad, of course, but here we're talking about making it more interesting, right? So that's how we would start. Sometimes too simple, sometimes complex, but with slow pace. So that's it. That's all the content we're going to write for the first slide. So from here, I go in and I do this for the rest of the presentation. So for each one of these slides, I would go and check all of these with a specific purpose in mind. Make sure that these slides are written so naturally that it's like me reading my own thoughts. And there's a very specific reason why I want to do this. If I write bullet points here, or if I write just 2-word sentences or 3-word sentences, and I'm supposed to say the rest, it will create a situation for me where I have to remember every single point I wanted to make about every single line on the screen, and I will definitely forget something in the middle of the presentation. But if I write exactly what I want to say in the presentation, then I create something that's very useful for human listeners. You see, when you're making a presentation, people are always split between these two tasks. Listen to you and look at you to get the full information of what you're talking about, because body language has its own importance in communication, of course, right? Or look at the text on the screen. And when people make presentations, the audience basically always is split between the two. They don't know if they should look at the presenter or they should look at the slides. So for me, I don't have any high desire for people to be looking at me all the time. I would rather convey the message that I want in the presentation. So I would rather have them read the slides with my voice helping them read the slides. So that's why for me it's way easier to just write out my thoughts exactly as I would think of them in my own mind when I was looking at these topics on the screen. So for every consecutive pass, after I have broken down each slide into 3 parts or 3 sentences, again, more or less if necessary, is to go in and write it in more natural language for me, since I'll be doing the presentation. So highlight the problem. Here, I would say something like, so we want to be natural and interesting to the audience, right? So I might say something like, so what's wrong with stories in games today? So again, this might not be the final thing I'm going to write in this presentation, but it's definitely the way I would communicate this topic to someone if I were to convey the same message to him. I wouldn't say something like stories today are too rigid. I don't want to have strict text like that. I want to make it as natural as possible for me, not only to think and to convey it in a way people will remember it because of the way I say it and the relationships I make in the text, but also because I can say it naturally and I can follow the rhythm in my head naturally through the presentation without having to remember what jokes to say, what sub-points to include. Everything can be here. So I would do the same conversion. So I would convert the thing that I pasted originally to something more natural, something I would say, so I can basically just read the slides as I'm showing them. The final part I would do is do something about the visuals of each slide. So, of course, on PowerPoint or on Google Slides or any of these software, you can have colorful backgrounds. I think you can insert drawings and little sketches to make your slides more interesting. So here, for example, since we have some empty space on the right of the slide, I might add a little cartoon figure of someone going like, what's wrong with stories in games today? So this I find is fine, and where you put it on the slide kind of dictates when people should look at it. So if the biggest thing on the screen is the title, if you see something like this at the top of the page, most people's eyes would be drawn to this part first and then these things. So if I put my human figure here to the right, then people's eyes might go 1, because this is the top biggest thing, and then 2 to the human figure here to the right, since that's the biggest, easiest to spot thing on the page. And then the third part would be this text under the title. Now, if we want people to focus on the text under the title first, and then in our little cute icon or drawing, then we might make the drawing smaller and put it down here, or even under the text. So down here in the middle. All these options are good, basically. So size and height on the slide dictates what people look at in what order. Higher and bigger gets the attention first. Then the second highest, biggest item gets the attention second, and so on. So that's a guideline for you. So after we've done all this and we've broken down our slides into more and more parts, then all we need to do is just go over the presentation a few more times and simply read out what we have on the screen. Here, the goal is to simply make the presentation sound natural, sound fun, sound engaging, and make sure that we deliver on the point we wanted to communicate. So I would make sure that, since I divided this presentation in 3 parts here, I would make sure that people clearly understand that first we highlight the problem, then we introduce the questions, then we add this additional lens to help us improve the overall quality. So that's the structure. And yeah, the rest is just making it look pretty and adding some fun icons here and there. But again, adding the icons is just the cherry on top. It's not something I would stress very much. I don't want the art of the presentation to take the attention of the audience away from the main point I'm trying to make. So that's it for the breaking one thing down into 3 approach. Let me know if you struggled with making presentations before, if this looked scary to you. This is, by the way, very similar to the way I create game design documents, since working on the pillars framework, we start with one main pillar, so the vision for the game, and then we break it down to the 3-4 pillars that are the main things we have in our game, and then we break down the pillars into features and items we think the game needs to deliver on its vision. So it's very useful for that aspect as well. If you're interested in this particular presentation, please let me know, and perhaps this would be something that's fun to do as a video on this channel. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, have fun.